Now, in the traditions that I'm talking about, there are some very clear prescriptions about the issue of why one burns out and how not to burn out. Let's say you are a doctor or a nurse who's getting called at this moment. You're a doctor or a nurse, and you experience a warm feeling towards your patient and a caring, and your technology is limited into what you can do because you're pitting your technology often against a deeper kind of law and a deeper kind of rhythm in the universe, and you start to experience failure. Now, what happens the first time? It hurts, and you go back and you may take a drink, or you may talk to your family, and it may hurt you, and it really pains, and you wonder, can I stay in this profession because it's going to hurt so bad? And then there are a number of things that happen after that. And professionals often become what's called professionally warm, which is a very interesting place they get into, where their emotions start to be in the service of their intellect. They are caring people, but they protect their hearts because it hurts too bad to have people dying that you're taking care of, or people not succeeding in beating their illness. And that pain, that attachment to how it comes out, makes you ultimately have to deal with the pain by closing down a little bit. You can't handle it because it is going to happen that you are losing patients. I mean, people do die. It just turns out we're all going to die. And most of us are going to die with some medical attention. And therefore, the medical community is going to lose us somewhere along the way. And how do you deal with a situation where you keep losing your patients? Is loss a failure? That's the interesting question. And do you have to make believe it is, or do you think it is? Now, the interesting, delicate line is, can you function in a role of being a healer, being where people seek you out to preserve life, and you can fulfill your function of doing it as effectively as you can without you emotionally being attached to whether or not that person lives or dies? See, that's the interesting one. It's your personal identity. It's your ego involvement in whether you succeed or failure, success being measured as keeping the person alive, that ends up doing you in. It ends up forcing your heart to go into these very strange kind of slightly remote things where you can watch pain and suffering and keep yourself from hurting too bad. The problem with closing down that way is it's not so easy to open up again. And a lot of people that are in helping professions feel themselves cut off from life energy a lot in order to be professional. And they can't go home at the end of the day and necessarily open their hearts again. And there's some kind of professional isolation that comes with the responsibility of having other people's lives in your hands. And the interesting question is whether that's necessary or not. And I'm not sure it is. I really am not. There are two injunctions that the Bhagavad-Gita, which is perhaps the most powerful of the Indian books, offers. One of them is, be not identified with being the actor, and the other is, be not attached to the fruits of the action. Now that's pretty strange. How could you take care of a patient without thinking you were taking care of the patient and without being attached to whether the patient gets better? That's what it's saying. Is that a conceivable thing, or is that book just off the wall? Or is that just an irresponsible statement in a book? I mean, does it possibly have a seed of something in it? It says that if you quiet down your being enough and listen to all the forces in the universe, you will hear that you are trained, you have certain skills, the skills are required in the society, and it is your function to fulfill them in the same way as when you sit in a car, you drive, and you fulfill your function. In India, it's called doing your dharma. You do the appropriate actions to your life, but where you keep your mind in relation to it is you don't let your mind get lost into identification with your role. See, for example, somebody has the role of a mother in life. How do you do? My name is Richard. How do you do? I'm a mother. Okay? That's their identity. I'm a mother. What happens when their children grow up? How many of you have watched that kind of anxiety that comes with somebody? Look, I'm a mother. But Ma, I'm 50 years old. I'm still your mother. You know, it's an inability to let go of the role. And how many of us are getting our psychological needs from identifying with the role of being a doer who helps, who heals, a certain kind of righteousness that we try to get energy from, but the fact of trying to get energy from that leads you to have to deal with the failure experience and with the frustration experience, and ultimately it burns you out. It gets you so that you pull back. Burnout doesn't mean you go running off screaming down the street. It can mean that you just close down a little bit and you fulfill your function, but you're not being fed by it. You're not feeling this incredible sense of growth that can come through a life lived as an alive function. I experienced that when I work with dying people or people that have potentially terminal illnesses, that if I'm open to them, the way I walk into a room and meet them is I don't meet them as healer and somebody needing healing, or as dying person and death aid, or whatever my role is, or as doctor or patient. I walk in and I see another being just like me, and that being is going through their life story and I'm going through mine. And our life stories are meeting in conjunction at that moment. And what we do with each other is what our skills and our needs and so on allow us to do together. The vehicle for us being together happens to be, in one case, in your case, it may, like when I was taking care of my stepmother as she was dying last year. Part of the vehicle for us to being together was carrying to the toilet, inserting the catheter, giving her pain medication, holding her hand. These were all the vehicles for us being together. But we didn't get lost in the vehicles. We kept meeting behind the space, looking into another person's eyes. Are you there? Am I here? We're just two human beings being together through this drama. Let's not get lost in the drama. Let's stay together as fellow beings. That quality of allowing another human being to meet you that way starts to enrich you through relationship. And I end up feeling graced and helped by everybody I supposedly help. I work with AIDS patients now. And those are very hard and horrendous situations at one level. At another level, it is another soul just like me who happens to be going through a different storyline than I am at the moment. And if I am caught in, this poor person with AIDS, all I do is suck them into their suffering more deeply. And it turns out that if you really want to heal people and define healing as the surcease from suffering, you have to accept your role is more than being a physical healer. Because many of you know people that were physically healed that didn't stop suffering. And many of you, I'm sure, have met people who were not physically healed who were not suffering. Part of the work we do is with pain, and the ways in which one approaches pain in such a way that one doesn't get lost in pain, and one can awaken and get freer and more spacious through the way one has commerce with one's own pain. Because the minute one resists against the pain and pushes against it, the resistance itself creates the suffering. And so part of the same work is how you approach healing. If you go the deeper level and say, healing is, I am trying to be an instrument for relieving people from suffering. The relief from suffering may involve dying and it may involve living. You don't know that. And the problem of defining a medical role somehow as godly in I must take over God's role of keeping this person alive or deciding who lives and who dies puts you in a position that is a losing position. It's a losing strategy. There's no doubt about it. And it's a painful one, terribly painful. So I guess all I could do today in this brief time we've had is just to raise the issue for you of where you are standing inside yourself in regard to the work you do every day. Because it is your inner stance that determines whether the work you do liberates your patients, releases them into a more spacious awareness through the way you do it, and also what it does for you, whether it heals you. If your work of healing isn't healing you, something's wrong. If I understand it right, a real relationship between two human beings, whether it's the bank clerk or your patient or your wife or your children, should heal you, and you should be enriched by it, not depleted by it. And yet, how many of us at the end of the day, oh, I'm exhausted, I'm so depleted because I was giving so much. That's a stance in your mind. It's the giving model that's burning you out. It's not what you did all day. People say, no, it's what I did. But you know you can come home exhausted and wiped out, and somebody you love calls you, and suddenly, oh, hi, and the energy's back, and you're wide awake again. And it was something to do with your mind. And my feeling is that we spend a lot of time filling the mind with content, but we very rarely examine the way in which the mind itself works. So I just encourage you, yes, we have to ask questions. I'm going to take a few questions. I must just encourage you to explore the possibility that you use the adventure of service as a vehicle for opening up the exploration of who you are in relation to what you're doing. Because I think if you were less a nurse and less a doctor, and more an awareness who was being a nurse and doctor, your payoff would be improved considerably, and death would become an interesting part of nature rather than an error and a failure. And you could still do your work, in fact, perhaps even more impeccably. Questions? Yes.
The question was, how do you handle it when you have someone who is frightened and wants to stay alive?
I know the question. When you have somebody that is suffering and that wants to stay alive and that is frightened and so on, you do what you can to relieve their suffering that they think is suffering. At the same moment, the way you do it and who you think you are in the doing of it creates an environment of your mind and your heart such that if they would want to come up for air, they could. There's nothing in you that demands that they say, oh, I want to awaken through dying. They may not want to. They may say, doctor, save me, transplant, do whatever you got to do, but keep me alive. I don't want to die. And your job isn't to say, oh, yes, you do. You have no moral right to decide that for anybody. Just like if somebody says, I've had enough, I'm not sure you have a moral right to say, no, you haven't. That's the same one. And you think you have that moral right, but not the other one. But it's the same issue both ways. But what I think you do is you work on yourself to be less caught in the drama that person is stuck in, so you don't stick them further into it. Because often, I go into a room with a woman who's dying. She's got pelvic cancer. She's in incredible pain. She's using very little pain medication. She would like to stay a little conscious. She's an intellectual. She's an old friend of Ernest Hemingway's. She's living with the Huxleys. She's writhing in pain. I come in and I tell her, I try to be wise, and she says, cut your bullshit. She doesn't want to hear it. She's an intellectual heavy. She doesn't want to know all that stuff. These are her words, not mine. I wouldn't swear it in this group. And just giving a case study. And so I wait. I come back a few weeks later. She's now very weak. She's writhing on the bed in pain, and you've seen that. You know what it's like. You know how painful pelvic cancer can be. And I sit down, and all I can do is sit by the bedside and meditate. And I'm just sitting there quietly allowing what is. I'm allowing nature to be. And I'm dealing with my emotions. I love her. I'm going to feel loss about her. I'm honoring my own pain. At the same moment, I'm seeing that this is nature unfolding. It's just the leaves. It's the autumn. It's what's happening. And I get very quiet. And I'm just sitting there quietly. And she's writhing in pain. And suddenly she turns to me and she says, I've never felt so peaceful in my life. I wouldn't be anywhere in the universe but here at this moment. And she's saying that at the same moment her body is writhing in pain. And what I understood happened was that I was just creating a space, and she resonated into it and tuned to that and felt that spaciousness and was no longer busy being the person in pain. She had flipped consciousness a little bit, which William James talks about a lot. So it's possible. Question? Yes.
The question was, we who are professional doctors, how do we convey the grander vision of existence to our patients?
Mahatma Gandhi, who is one of the people I've studied a great deal, he was in a railway car and it was leaving the station, and a reporter rushed up and said, "Gandhiji, give me a message to take back to the people." And he only had time to scribble on a paper bag. And he handed the piece out and it said, "My life is my message." And it feels to me that what you offer every human being you meet is what you are, what you have become. And it's the interesting thing in the way you presented it was you say, we who are, I don't remember exactly the words, but professional doctors or whatever. And right there is the question of whether or not it is sufficient for you to define yourself in that way, and whether or not you are impoverished, actually, by getting too defined with your role, too identified with the role. And that this thing you say, this grander vision, isn't this, in a sense, the responsibility of every human being to examine that in their own lives? So what I'm saying is, perhaps the significance and responsibility and power of the role overwhelms us a little bit, and we get lost in it. And then we fail to examine the deeper truths about our being, which I think is what a birth is about. I think a birth is that opportunity to awaken through that kind of exploration. So I don't think anybody is freed from that exploration by their social role. Yes.
Question. If I begin to view my interactions with my dying patients in a very different way, isn't there danger I could cause harm to my role as a doctor?
It is certainly I can hear it perfectly. I mean, I'm sure many people here can hear it. And I think that I addressed it earlier by saying the recognition that you are fulfilling a role in the society, and that role has certain directives to it, that you are in the role of preserving life. And that is going to determine what prescriptions you write and what things you put in the record and what your attitude. That's the role. Whether you identify with the role or not, you still fulfill the role. And in fact, you will fulfill the role more impeccably the less emotionally involved you are in the role. So it actually works the other way. In fact, in judo and aikido and all that, they teach that the precision of action comes from the quietness and the non-identification with the doing of it. You develop a quiet space behind it from which you can hear all the variables all at once, and your action comes out as more impeccable because your eyes aren't clouded so much by your identification with failure, success, medical insurance, all the issues that affect every prescription you write. So my suggestion is that I understand the threat potential, but I don't think it means that you would change the way you play the role, except you play it better because you play it from a quieter place inside. I think that's the way it works. I wish we could go into it, but I think our time is over. It's 1:02. And we work on schedule. Thank you very much for allowing me to come here and speak to you.